genius. It's an emperor who once made all of Europe tremble. It's a conqueror, a strategist, a towering symbol of the Napoleonic era. But did you know he was once a nobody? An artillery captain dismissed and overlooked. A poor, quiet soldier from Corsica, lost in a France torn by chaos. No one trusted him. No one knew his name. And no one believed that from the smoke and fire of a small port city named Toulon, a spark would rise, one that would burn down the Old Order of Europe, Toulon, 1793. A place where history was not just written in ink, but in gunpowder, cannon fire, and the desperate will to rise. Late 1793, the French Revolution had entered its fourth year. France was no longer itself. King Louis XVI had gone to the guillotine. The nobility were being hunted. The church crushed. Those merely suspected of counter-revolution could lose. Their lives over a glance, the entire country was drowning in terror and suspicion. From Paris to Lyon, from Marseille to Bordeaux. Nowhere was safe. Amid this chaos, in the south of France, there was a port city named Toulon. There, a rebellion erupted and quickly spun out of control. Toulon. The city that deserted the Revolution Toulon was a strategic harbor on the Mediterranean coast. It housed the Southern Fleet, stored thousands of tons of ammunition, and harbored dozens of warships. A vital link in France's national defense. But the people of Toulon were Royalists at heart who despised the Jacobin extremism. They watched blood spill daily from the guillotine and had lost faith in the new regime. In August 1793, Toulon overthrew its local revolutionary government. They pledged allegiance to the monarchy and sent letters begging for help from the British. In Spanish fleets, within weeks, over 17,000 coalition troops had landed. The British fleet, under Admiral Samuel Hood, seized the harbor. The Union Jack flew from the city's highest fortress. Toulon had fallen into enemy hands. A French city, a French fleet, is now under British control to the revolutionary government. In Paris, this was not just rebellion. It was betrayal. And in the reign of terror, betrayal had only one outcome. The campaign to reclaim Toulon, total disarray. September, revolutionary forces marched toward Toulon. But they were no professional army. They were a disorderly mob, militias, local units that had never worked together, and political commissars brimming with suspicion. Commanders changed constantly. There were no maps, no tactics. Artillery, the key to any siege, was almost entirely neglected. For weeks, they launched attacks on the forts surrounding the city. Wave after wave was repelled. Bodies were left scattered across scorched grass. From inside the city, the British and their allies simply watched. They held the high ground, held their weapons, held smug smiles. Paris began to lose patience. The Committee of Public Safety sent a flood of representatives on mission. Men with the authority to execute anyone they deemed lacking in revolutionary zeal. No one was in charge anymore. Everything was falling apart. Then, one afternoon in early October, amid red dust and distant cannon fire, a young soldier stepped onto the battlefield. Thin, short, a heavy Corsican accent. He limped as he walked, holding a notebook filled with sketches. No one noticed him. No one said his name. But history had already turned to look. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. He was only 24, born on the island of Corsica, a land annexed by France less than 30 years prior. He wasn't Parisian, not a nobleman, no prestigious lineage, just an artillery officer, captain rank, trained at the military school. In Brienne and later at the École Militaire, before arriving at Toulon, Napoleon had been transferred repeatedly. At one point, he lived a drifting life in Marseille, nearly unemployed, writing small books on war and geography just to survive. No, one believed that someone like him could make history. But when Napoleon was sent to Toulon to temporarily take charge of the artillery, everything began to change. He didn't shout. He didn't strike heroic poses around the camp. He pitched his tent near the front lines, slept, and and ate with the gunners. Took notes relentlessly. He personally scouted every hill, every forest, every mound around the city. Every slope, every angle, every enemy fortress, all were drawn meticulously into a notebook filled with cryptic markings. No one ordered him to do it. He did it because he saw what others overlooked: weakness. Toulon, seemingly impregnable, was in fact hanging by a fragile thread. Napoleon realized that if they could capture two southern forts, Guillet and Balaguer, the entire British fleet in the bay would be exposed to revolutionary artillery. No need to storm the center, no need to bleed for every wall. Just cut off the supply line and apply pressure with cannon fire, and the British would be forced to retreat. Rewrote the entire strategy, presented it to the political commissioners and senior commanders. At first, they laughed. A short Corsican artillery captain teaching them how to take a city. But then, some began to listen, because what he spoke wasn't just theory. He had numbers. He had maps. So more than that, he had a plan clearer than anyone else's. And so the plan was approved. Reluctantly, but approved nonetheless, Napoleon was given full command of the artillery for the upcoming assault. And within days, he threw himself into the work as if he'd been waiting for this moment all his life. The gunners were retrained. Heavy cannons were dragged up hills near the harbor under rain and enemy fire. Enemy supply lines were bombarded by the hour. Napoleon oversaw every gun placement, every barrel angle, every explosive round. He didn't just give orders, he worked. Alongside the troops, bandaged the wounded, carried gunpowder. Ate hard bread with rolled-up sleeves caked in mud amid the chaos of the Toulon campaign. Napoleon Bonaparte didn't need to shout to be noticed. He made people look through action, from the common soldiers in the trenches to the officers who once scoffed at him. All began speaking of that name. Differently, not with reverence, not with affection, but with trust. When the cannons roared and the hilltops around the bay lit up in the night, history turned in a new direction, and amid the smoke and fire, an unknown man was writing the first chapter of a legend. December 16th, 1793. A pale dawn broke over the hills off the coast of Toulon. Sea winds carried the stench of gunpowder. The ground was damp. Artillerymen curled behind their cannons, hands clenching the ice-cold barrels. At the highest point, south of the harbor, Napoleon stood alone. He said nothing, just watched. Ahead, not far off, stood the two key fortresses, Guillet and Balaguer. If they could be taken, the entire British fleet would fall within the range of revolutionary artillery. This was the decisive moment. The order was given. A short blast of the bugle. Troops surged toward the hilltops like crashing waves of flesh and fury. Cannon fire roared. Earth and rock exploded, laced with blood and dust. The Spanish defenders fought with ferocious resolve. They fired relentlessly, from loopholes, towers, behind stone walls. The battle raged on for hours. Napoleon commanded from just behind the front. He was wounded. A shot to the left thigh brought him down, blood soaking his trousers. But instead of retreating, he grabbed a cane, stood back up, and kept commanding. The soldiers saw him still standing. The cannons still firing. The attack pressed on. At last, after hours of brutal fighting, the two crucial forts fell to the revolutionaries. And that very night, heavy guns were dragged into position. They were old, worn, some rusted. But under Napoleon's command, they knew exactly where to strike. December 17th, for the first time. The entire port of Toulon came within artillery range. Napoleon gave the order. The cannons thundered like sledgehammers. Shells rained down on the docks, powder depots, and warships. British ships panicked. They cut anchor. Some collided. Some caught fire. Smoke rose in thick plumes. The entire Allied fleet, British, Spanish, Neapolitan, began a hasty retreat. No one had time to evacuate everyone. No one saved all the munitions. Panic spread like wildfire. Inside the city, Royalist sympathizers realized it was too late. Toulon had fallen. Some fled. Some surrendered. Some were killed on the spot by angry mobs. The people of Toulon, divided and shaken, didn't know whether to celebrate or despair. On the hilltop, mid still glowing cannon barrels, Napoleon Bonaparte watched the enemy fleet flee. His face pale from blood loss, but his eyes burned. Like fire, no cheers of victory, no songs of triumph. Only the sea wind, the acrid stench of burning, and the shattering of metal, signaling the end of an era. Toulon had fallen. But one name had just begun to echo across all of France. Toulon had fallen. But this victory wasn't measured only by captured ground. It was measured by something far more valuable, the seed of trust that had just begun to sprout. As revolutionary artillery opened fire on Toulon's port, the fleet had no room left to maneuver. The heavy warships couldn't turn under fire, smaller vessels burned or became trapped, the British forces fell into chaos, the Spanish soldiers fled, many mercenaries even dropped their weapons and slipped into the crowd, desperate to disappear. Admiral Hood, commander of the British fleet, had no choice. He ordered a full retreat. He knew Toulon could no longer be held. But if the docks, the shipyards, and the naval arsenals were left intact, the Revolutionary Army would seize it all. And so, in desperation, a scorched earth plan was set in motion. Destroy the entire French fleet still anchored in the bay in that moment of chaos and smoke. One man was entrusted with a critical task, Napoleon Bonaparte. With a team of engineers and gunners, he rushed into the harbor where pockets of enemy, soldiers and armed traps still remained. Napoleon gave orders to scuttle the remaining ships, burn the ammunition depots, demolish the shipbuilding stations, and remove every usable cannon from its mounting. They could not let the enemy return. They could not risk Toulon falling into counter-revolutionary hands again. That night, Toulon burned. Fires from sinking ships, from exploding powder, from shattered arsenals. The sky glowed red, mirrored on the waters of the Mediterranean. Civilians ran in all directions. Some wept for their homes. Others stood silent, uncertain which side they belonged to anymore. Meanwhile, revolutionary troops took control of. The streets, traitors, were executed. A provisional revolutionary government was declared in the center of the city. At the great square where the British flag had once flown, only broken flagpoles remained, creaking softly in the wind. Napoleon stood there silently, his arm bandaged, skin scorched by sun and smoke, eyes dark and sunken from sleepless nights. No one patted his back, no applause, no ceremony. But in the hearts of the soldiers who had fought under his cannons, something had changed. Something unspoken, unmistakable. Toulon had been liberated, and France had just seen the first flash of military genius named Bonaparte. Morning broke after a night of fire. Toulon lay in ruins. Wrecked ships drifted like ghosts across the bay. Thin columns of smoke still hovered in the air. The scent of gunpowder, of iron, of loss still lingered. Napoleon stood on the hill. Gazing down at it all, the guns had gone silent. Only the wind remained, and the sound of his own heartbeat, slow, steady, unmistakably alive. People often ask, are great men born of their times, or do they forge the times themselves? With Bonaparte, the answer was both. Had been born that night in blood and fire, and with his own hands had struck the very first beat of history. Elsewhere on the battlefield, an urgent dispatch was sent to Paris. Artillery under the command of Captain Bonaparte played a decisive role. Recommend immediate promotion. Days later, in a makeshift camp surrounded by bandaged soldiers, Napoleon Bonaparte received the rank of Brigadier General, 20-4 years old, a nameless officer with no noble lineage, no connections, no favors. Now, the youngest general of the Republic, an old officer whispered to a comrade, no introduction needed. Toulon was his introduction. Napoleon stepped out of the tent. The sky was still, the breeze gentle. He gave no speech. held no celebration, just clenched his fist and looked up at the heavens where the cannons once lit the night. The genius had just awakened, and the world did not yet know it had collided with destiny. Toulon was not merely a victory, it was the opening chapter of an empire, of an emperor, of a name, Napoleon Bonaparte.